I'm Bob Short, and this is Reflections on Georgia Politics, sponsored by the Richard B. Russell Library at the University of Georgia and the Duckworth Library at Young Harris College. Our guest today is Margaret Cloud Holliman, who for many years has been very active in the Republican Party of Georgia and has been a part of the transformation in Georgia from the Democratic Party to the present-day Republican Party. You were born in Bainbridge, Georgia.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, how in the world did you get to Atlanta?
Well, don't you know how little country girls finish school and go to the big city to find a job?
And
that's what I did.
Did you? When and why did you get involved in politics?
I think maybe my husband had a major part in that. He was a professor at Georgia Tech and a very outspoken, strong conservative, and he obviously had an influence on me. Mm-hmm. And so after my children got up a little bit older, it was 1964, we had been off to Cleveland, Ohio for 3 years while my husband did his doctorate so he could come back and teach. He had been working in research at Georgia Tech and decided he wanted to teach, and at that time they were beginning to require PhDs for teaching. So we went off for that. Came back to Atlanta in '64, right in the beginning of the Goldwater thing, and my children were up, 7, 10, and so I was free to do some things in the daytime, and that's how I got started. I just went and signed up to be a volunteer.
Mm-hmm. So you've always been Republican?
Well, pretty much voted Republican, but growing up in Georgia, we didn't have any Republicans to vote for except for president. Mm-hmm. And I generally had, well, let's call me a conservative, basically.
Good. Do you remember your first campaign?
The first one I actually worked in was the Goldwater.
In 1964.
Mm-hmm.
And Goldwater won Georgia, which was
yes.
surprising at the time.
Only 5 states, I believe.
Tell us how he campaigned in the South, where he won, I think, 5 states.
Well, in those days, we hand-addressed envelopes. We looked up phone numbers in regular phone books, and we had telephones, and we sat down and called people. And we didn't have, well, we had access to voter lists, but you had to go to the county and buy them. You didn't have computers or anything. Everything was done by hand. Even we had to lick the stamps for the mailings, and it was more of a personal type campaign in those days than it is now. It all seems to be kind of, especially a national election, be run out of a central location, not that personal door-to-door and person-to-person.
Mm. There was no television, advertising.
Yeah, a little.
There was. Did Senator Goldwater come to Georgia to campaign?
He did.
And what did he do when he was here?
You're going so far back, I'm not sure I can remember. He made a couple of appearances in public venues and had great crowds show up and made a speech, and that's really about all I can remember.
2 years later, you were involved in the governor's race,
Mm-hmm.
and you supported the Republican.
Yeah, I actually walked my street, which has probably 80 houses on it, collecting signatures to get Bo Calloway on the ballot because we'd never had a statewide Republican on a ballot before.
Mm-hmm. Tell us what you remember about that campaign.
Oh, that was exciting, really exciting. And we did a lot of that personal stuff, unlike today. Mm-hmm. Again, door to door, knocking on doors, dodging barking dogs, stuff like that. And a lot of hand-addressed mailings and personal telephone calls.
Were you disappointed in the outcome?
Oh, obviously. Felt cheated, actually. Although it was legal, I don't mean that.
Well, the fall of 1966 was another very interesting race. The Republican nominee was an Atlanta newsman who people knew well, and Jimmy Carter.
Yep.
And you supported the Republican Hal Suit.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever catch any grief for being against a local candidate?
No. People asked me why I supported Hal's suit, and it was basically his political philosophy, which I considered conservative. And I know that Jimmy Carter spoke conservatively, but we were in the process of trying to build a Republican Party, and the only way to do that was to elect some Republicans. Georgia had been a one-party state, and I think competition is always good.
Well, let's talk about that for a minute. Tell us a little bit about how the Republican Party went about becoming as strong as it is today.
I think there are several factors involved, and I think it took a long time to get there. We grew up I grew up in southwest Georgia, where there was nobody but Democrats on the ticket, as I said, except in presidential elections. And I felt like, as I got older and began to understand the political process, that having one party dominate a state is not good for the state or the people there. Everybody needs somebody looking over their shoulder. Mm-hmm. Or at least it seems in politics people do. Mm-hmm. And the party started out, in my opinion, kind of in the wrong way by running people at the top of the ticket, like governor, lieutenant governor, instead of from the ground up. And at some point, and I can't even remember who or where this all came, it sort of evolved that everybody began to realize the real way to build it was to start at the bottom up and run for some local spots and build your way up to those top spots.
Moving ahead to the first Reagan campaign. You were involved in that one too. What did you do in that campaign?
1976, I was state co-chairman for the Reagan campaign in Georgia. The chairman was a young man named Sam Tate, and I was his co-chairman for the whole state.
Mm-hmm. What did you do as co-chairman?
Well, I had been the president of the Georgia Federation of Republican Women from 71 through 75. So in 76, when they asked me to do this, it was primarily, I think, because of my knowledge of Republican women throughout the state and my contacts with them. Mm-hmm. And that was mostly my assignment was to bring in those Republican women that I already had contact with to be a supporter of Reagan.
Well, Reagan really had some bad luck there because his opponent was from Georgia.
Yep.
And did you find that difficult?
A lot of people said to me, how can you support somebody over a Georgia boy? And I said, well, because I happen to think he's the better candidate. Mm-hmm. I liked his philosophy. I thought he could lead the country out of the kind of doldrums because he was such an upbeat guy. Mm-hmm. And he saw the bright side of everything, which I thought we needed.
Mm-hmm. You went to many national Republican conventions. Tell us about that.
Well, I started, actually the first one I went to was 1968 as a guest. And I guess I got bitten by the bug at that one. And that was when Nixon was nominated. And then I went in 1972 to Miami Beach when Nixon was renominated as a delegate. And that was probably the last, no, well, not the last, but it was toward the last of the brokered type conventions where somebody promised a delegate this and that to vote for a certain side, because as then we evolved into statewide primaries where the delegates were committed to whoever won the primaries.
Mm-hmm. What was your view of Nixon as a president?
Oh, that's a good question. I think he did a lot of good things. I think he made one serious blunder with that silly little break-in at that headquarters. If he had simply said, I didn't authorize that, those people no longer work for me, and it would have probably died. But he tried to cover it all up. That was a big mistake.
Do you think he should have been impeached?
That's a difficult question because I don't think he did an impeachable offense. He didn't lie under oath. He didn't go before Congress and say, I didn't do this or I didn't know anything about it. So I think it's difficult. I would have hated to see it just for the fact of the turmoil it would cause in our government.
Well, let's get back for a minute to President Reagan. How would you judge him as a president?
As among the better ones in my lifetime.
Mm-hmm. What things did he do that you thought were good?
Oh, dear. Tax cuts. I mean, that's a basis of conservatism. Don't spend more than you need to. Mm-hmm. Actually, he did spend a little more than he needed to. But I thought he was taking us in the right direction. I thought he was very strong on our national defense issues. And I do believe that his building up of our defense had a lot to do with the crumbling of the Soviet Union. And I think that's a major thing that happened in his 8 years.
Good. Getting back to Georgia, let's talk about some of the Republican leaders you knew in those days who helped build the foundation of the present-day Republican Party. I can recall Bob Shaw.
Oh, yeah, he's a really good friend of mine.
Is he really? Bob was chairman at a time when the Republicans really started getting stronger in the political scene here. Paul Coverdell.
Yep.
Did you know Paul?
Yep.
Tell us about Paul.
He was a really smart strategist, politician. Mm-hmm. I remember meeting him when he first ran for a state Senate seat in Metro Atlanta. And he looked like a little boy to me. He was so young looking. Mm-hmm. But I understand he went door to door. And I believe he lost the first election he ran, first seat he ran for, but determined to win and went back and did it again. And then he had a major role in the state party.
Then there was Rodney Cook.
Yep, I knew Rodney.
Ran for mayor.
Yep.
And governor.
Yep.
Tell us about Rodney.
I didn't know him real well personally. Mm-hmm. I met him many times at events, but on a personal basis, I didn't know him very well.
But he was one of the first Republicans elected
yes.
to public office.
He and Mike Egan.
Mike Egan, yes.
And a guy named Kill Townsend.
Kill Townsend, yes. All were members of the legislature.
Mm-hmm.
Rodney ran, as I said, for mayor and governor.
Right.
And that was a period when the Republican Party really began building up strength in the
and
state.
And struggling.
But they were successful in building a party.
Yeah.
Richard Freeman.
Mm-hmm.
You know Richard?
I knew him,
mm-hmm.
but not real well.
And modern day Republicans, Rusty Paul.
Yep, good friend.
Yeah, he's very active today
mm-hmm.
in help building the party. He was chairman
mm-hmm.
at one point. And then there was Billy Lovett, Did you know Billy?
No, not
Who was
really.
a Democrat who switched parties.
Yeah.
What do you think about Democrats who switch parties? Are they welcomed
Yeah,
by
because
Republicans?
frankly, in my early days in politics, as I go back to saying that I started out as a conservative, and which led me to the Republican Party, and a lot of those men that switched parties, and most of the Democrats in the South were very conservative in those days, and as the National Democrat Party tended to get more and more liberal, a lot of those conservatives started moving over to the Republican Party based on the principles of each party.
Political philosophy
Yes.
has changed it. Many Democrats are doing that now. Some people criticize them because they believe that they only want to stay in office and get reelected into office, so they have majority Republicans in their district, so they switch parties. Is that a legitimate reason?
I think that's a legitimate commentary, not necessarily a legitimate reason to switch parties.
Mm-hmm. What would you do?
What would I do?
If you were a Democrat and your district became Republican, would you switch over? Or vice versa, if you're a Republican and your district became a Democratic district, would you switch parties?
No.
You wouldn't.
No. Back in why would I have been fighting against the odds that we were fighting against in the 60s if I wanted to just be where the action is? The Democrats owned the state practically in those days, but I didn't go join the Democrat Party just because they were the leading party or ruling party.
While we're on the subject of parties, let's talk for a minute about the Tea Party. Do you think it has served any effective purpose?
I think maybe it has. I think that it has maybe redirected some Republicans to remember what the basic philosophy is of the Republican Party. And again, I'm used the word conservative because that's where I come from.
Do you think it will last, the Tea
The Tea
Party?
Party
movement?
depends on leadership and where they use their strength and how they use it.
Let's talk a minute about the religious right in politics. Most of the religious right movement has been Republican, strong Republican. Has that been a factor in the growth of the Georgia Republican Party?
Yes.
Were you involved in that?
No. I didn't ever do any work in that except volunteer a time or two for some events, but I never was actively involved in it. I was already involved too much in the Republican Party and some church volunteerism and just didn't have time for all of it.
What role do you think that religion should play in politics and public affairs?
That's a tough question, but I think that your religion certainly leads you to your political philosophy.
Well, obviously, the religious right has played a role in the development of conservative politics in
Yes.
the country.
Yes.
Did you know Sadie Fields?
Yes.
Tell us about Sadie Fields.
Sadie was one time called one of the most influential women in Georgia politics, and she was and is.
Still active.
Yes.
Let me ask you this question, since we're on that subject. I think you'll agree that the Christian Coalition and the religious right perhaps does not have the strength that it once had in Georgia. Can they recover?
I think they could if they had the right leadership.
I noticed where this is 2012, the next Georgia gubernatorial election is 2014. I read recently where the president of the Christian Coalition in Georgia has already introduced a candidate, endorsed a candidate for 2014.
Who?
Herman Cain.
Oh,
I found that strange, that the organization would allow its president to endorse someone 2 years down the road. That's just me, okay? What do you think is the future of the Republican Party in Georgia? Will it remain as strong as it is today?
if they stick to the principles that got them elected, they can.
So you're happy with the conduct of the present Republican leadership in the state?
Yeah, I guess I am. You know, there's never anything is quite perfect. If I were leading it, I might lead it in a slightly different direction. I'm not unhappy, but I think that we do have some Republicans in elected office that need to reacquaint themselves with our platforms.
Mm-hmm. The Republican Party in Georgia and elsewhere has been accused from time to time of being non-inclusive. How do you react to that?
As I react that's untrue.
Mm-hmm.
Because I have worked, I've never done anything in this party except on a volunteer basis, and I've always been open to any person that wants to come and volunteer and be a part. I think we have some people who sometimes will come into one of our organizing conventions and think that they need to step into a leadership role. And all of us start at the bottom and work up, and that's our philosophy. And if they can't walk in and run things, then they say they are not welcome.
Mm-hmm. How about the racial aspects?
The door is open to them. We have several very strong political black leaders in the party right now.
Mm-hmm. If you were president today, what would you do?
Of the United States?
Yes.
Wow, that's too big a job for me. I think things are in a really bad state economically and maybe even in foreign affairs. I just think we don't hold the sway in the world that we did, and it's a bigger job than I could handle.
Are we past the point where we can return to our original purpose in this country?
I don't think we're past it, but I think we have veered away from it so much that it will take quite a bit of time to get us back.
Mm-hmm. Which party would you think could do that quickest?
Well, of course, mine, the Republican Party.
Because of?
I think the basic principles of the average Republican leader is based on our Constitution and what the Founding Fathers saw us as.
If I came to you and said, I want to get involved in politics, will you help me? What would you tell me?
I'd say yes. If you believe in the principles that we operate under, then we would welcome you and come on in and get your feet dirty.
What should I do first?
Come down to the headquarters and volunteer, make some phone calls, look up some phone numbers, the same kind of thing that most of us did when we started.
So what you're telling me is that the Republican Party in Georgia has been built around grassroots activity.
Absolutely. And I think if we get away from that, we will lose.
What if I told you that I wanted to campaign for a certain candidate, what would you tell me?
I would tell you to contact that candidate's office and tell them that you want to be involved and you would like to help, and they would put you to work probably.
So you're nonpartisan when it comes to candidates.
No.
I mean, in party campaigns.
Oh, you mean in primary races?
Primary, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I would still put you in touch with the right person. If you chose one that, say, that I wasn't supporting, for instance, in a primary, and you wanted to work for the other guy, I would tell you to call the other guy.
Johnny Isaacson told me once that the difference between the Republican and Democratic parties in Georgia, insofar as electing candidates is concerned, was the fact that the Republican Party has much more bench strength, which means that what you've been saying is you sort of climb and they coach and they recruit and it's paid off.
Yeah, I think he was right.
There are many people now serving in our legislature, for example, who have been looking and searching and educating themselves for those positions all these years.
Many of them started as college Republicans, and I understand that here on this campus you have a very strong college Republican group. If they didn't start at college, they joined the Young Republicans organization, and many of the people serving in our government today have been through those processes and grew into where they are.
So how involved are you today?
Almost daily something.
Really?
And I'm going Friday morning to help with a mailing.
For the party, for a candidate?
For the president.
For the president?
For Romney.
You know, some Democrats like to brag that Georgia has never elected a Republican governor because both of the governors that have been elected were Democrats. What do you say to that?
I say they were Democrats.
That's good.
But again, we go back to something I said earlier, where a lot of part of the growth in Georgia of the Republican Party is based on conservative politics, not the name of the party. And Georgia's Democrats back when were conservative. And when they felt like the National Party went more liberal and left them, it was an easy step to come into the Republican Party based on philosophy.
What are you going to do in the future? You going to stick with it?
As long as I can move around.
Well, it's been very nice talking with you. Is there anything else we need to say or do?
I will comment on, you mentioned Bob Shaw. He was state chairman of the party at the same time that I was president of the women's organization, and we worked very closely together in those years, 71 through 76, 75.
Ralph Reed was also chairman at one point. Did you know Ralph? Tell us about Ralph.
He's a great organizer. He's a good fundraiser. He's a good political strategist. And I don't know him closely, personally, but I do know that about him.
Well, suppose we look forward 20 years when students will be researching you. Is there anything you would like to say?
I'd like to say probably that I feel proud of of the volunteer effort I've put in, and it's been a really great thing to watch Georgia become competitive in politics. And as my initial reason was, I thought we needed some competition, not just one party ruling forever.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you.
Margaret Holliman.
Thank you.